Hello, BookTube. Hello, AuthorTube. And hello, all you fellow lunatics who are doing NaNoWriMo with me in just a couple of weeks. In just a couple of weeks, we will enter November, the month of November, which is home to, among other things, National Novel Writing Month, where hundreds of thousands of people all over the world come together, metaphorically, to write 50,000 words of the first draft of a new work of fiction in the month of November. Despite all the other stuff that they have going on, they come together, we come together, to write 1,667 words a day to get to the goal of 50,000 words by the end of the month. It's exhilarating. I was overjoyed when I first discovered NaNoWriMo years and years ago, and it has been exhilarating for me ever since. You can write on your own, of course. Writing is a voluntary activity. You can do it. You don't need NaNoWriMo to do it, and I do. But I love the feeling of ghostly camaraderie in NaNoWriMo. How you know there are other people doing this. A lot of people make vlogs of their progress or show up in the NaNoWriMo chat forums. I've looked a lot, and I will continue to look for the rest of October, for YouTubers doing that sort of process just openly and honestly, just engagingly, like we do here on BookTube. Just talking about their writing and their writing process. I found very few of those. Very few. Mostly what I have found is people selling stuff. Selling merch, selling webinars, selling writing programs. And often not advertising that ahead of time. So you get 5 minutes into the video and you realize, oh, the reason this is also anal and self-serving is because this is all a sales pitch. Not pleasant at all. I'll keep looking. I keep hoping that there is an AuthorTube version of BookTube. Once upon a time there was. But I'm not finding it. Maybe it's just that as few people as read, even fewer people write. I'm hoping that, if it is the explanation, does not apply here. You should all be doing NaNoWriMo in a couple of weeks. You should all be doing that. Everyone who's listening to this should be doing that. If you're a voracious reader, if your life has been changed by reading, then you are obliged to write. It wouldn't be so maybe if it were 100 years ago and you had no education, no freedom, no free time, and no ability to write, but you have all of those things now. And your life has been changed by things that you've read. Therefore, you are obligated to pay it forward. Quite apart from the fact that it's an enormous amount of fun. I cannot stress that enough, even though I know that most people who've never tried it don't believe me. It's an enormous amount of fun. Even at the beginning stages, but oh my, when you're not a beginner anymore, the fun goes off the charts. Just off the charts. I'm going to be participating in NaNoWriMo this year, and I want to talk today about two things: chapters and tech. Because I've got my iPad right here. This is my 7th generation iPad. I brought it new. I very seldom buy my tech new, but I bought this new, and I got the smart keyboard that goes with it. This is a cloth-covered keyboard. You fold it like that and place the iPad on it, and write, write to your heart's content. And it charges with the iPad, so it's not a Bluetooth device. You don't ever need to give it batteries of its own or make sure that it's charged. And I love it. I absolutely love the experience of typing on this keyboard. There are no gaps between the keys. There's no place for dog hair to go. There's no place for my near-dead fingers to snag on things. I've lost track over the years of typing on various laptops of how many times one of my fingers has snagged on the S or the A key and simply popped it across the room. I have to go and find it. I learned to type on a manual typewriter, and although I have tried to gentle my process over the years, I still pound the daylights out of a keyboard. But not this thing. This thing is covered in cloth. It's the most wonderful typing experience that I've ever experienced. So I try to do a lot of typing on this thing, even though the Apple iPad operating system, they've done a lot to try to make it, a laptop replacement. And when in the 7th generation, they were not there. This takes as many updates as I can get for it. and I research as many shortcuts and workarounds as I can, but it's not the same. It's not, for instance, as I mentioned yesterday, redundant. It's not completely redundant. If I want to, for instance, I don't even know, if I want to write a review of a book for Open Letters Review, I can do that just fine. In fact, I can do that more enjoyably on this thing than I can on any tech that I have. It feels so wonderful to do. And I can even split the screen, thanks to new Apple OS updates. New meaning 3 years old. I can split the screen. I can be doing a couple of things at one time. I can multitask. That didn't used to be the case on an iPad. But when the time comes to do everything else, sure, I can do all of that. But when the time comes to do everything else with that entry, that review, it largely fails. It's almost impossible to accurately copy and size an image, for instance, to accompany a post. The post itself often will go wrong in one unfixable way or another. What is natural and smooth on a laptop becomes a little bit of a logistical nightmare on this thing, and other things are just not possible at all. So I still have to split the work with my tech here. I have this at all times because writing, for a large part of what I do, regardless of whether it's work or play, regardless of whether it will be NaNoWriMo, a large part of what I do is simply writing. And I have segmented, I've compartmentalized the other parts of it. So, okay, if this thing doesn't work to get, for instance, an assignment done in a common Word document format, reformatted and sent to an editor, if this will only do one part of that, the writing part, not the others, that's still worth it, because the writing experience is so comfortable on this. I'm sure that will be worth it for NaNoWriMo. I'm positive that it will be. Because unlike a lot of people who do NaNoWriMo, I don't submit my manuscript to NaNoWriMo's website at the end of the month. That's the way that you get a certified win from NaNoWriMo itself, is if you reach 50,000 words and you submit your manuscript so they can verify that fact. Then you get a little certificate or a pat on the head. And briefly, years ago, I thought about doing that. But no, I thought at the time, no one's ever going to see this stuff that I'm writing. And the point is to get to 50,000 words and write the end, not to have NaNoWriMo tell me I'm a good boy. So, and also, I'm not, as I've said many times over the years, I'm not 100% sure about the legalities there. I know that lots of publishing success stories have come from NaNoWriMo, so they can't be playing a shady game with manuscripts. But I don't like submitting a manuscript to the internet just in general, much less to... something about it bothers me. Probably I'm being paranoid about that, but I don't do that. So forever and ever I was thinking, well, if that's the case, then you don't need to worry about any of the rest of it, so all you're going to be doing is writing. In which case, this is just fine. It's my method of choice. That might not be true in the future. I have a whole bunch of ideas, a secret project where that might not be true. And this doesn't play well with a lot of other venues. That my laptop, even though it's 11 years old, does play very well with them. Maybe it's just a question of optimizing this. I learn about this iPad all the time, and maybe that's the case. Or it could be, this is the 7th generation iPad. It could be that the solution to my tech here is to upgrade. Just as simple as that, to upgrade to the 10th generation iPad, which won't take this Magic Keyboard, but maybe there's an equivalent. Maybe there's something that is just as good to use. The 10th generation iPad probably gets along with everything. Probably any software glitches that have been the problem here are solved on that. And it has a huge amount of storage, and it's a beautiful, great machine. It's entirely possible that might be the root. I remember the psychological agony of making the decision for this thing, 7th generation iPad. This was the entry-level iPad, just called iPad. I remember the agony of watching a million videos on YouTube, honing down my choices, and then thinking, I remember thinking, every once in a while, even an eBay rat like you has to just buy a piece of new tech. It'll have fewer problems. It will be better than the second generation tech that you get. Sooner or later, even you have to do that. And I bit the bullet and I paid the full price for this iPad and the full price for the Magic Keyboard, which was not cheap. Add them together, it was a significant chunk of money, and it proved its worth. I hate to say it. I have an old friend who is deeply involved in tech and who runs a tech channel on YouTube, who says, I know those lower prices on eBay for secondhand stuff are tempting, but you're going to end up with a closet full of those things and one or two new things that do the job. Whereas the old things are attractive for the $50 price tag, but they don't do the job. I hate to give him credit for being right, but it's possible that he was right. So it's possible that the next step for me, not this NaNoWriMo, which is only 2 weeks away, but it's possible that the next step for me is just an iPad upgrade. I said about the first iPad that I ever got, I was given the second generation iPad and didn't know what it was, didn't think, what is this? It's less convenient than a laptop and it doesn't act as a phone, so what on earth? And it wasn't 3 or 4 weeks after using that second generation iPad, which still works. It's still just fine. It wasn't 2 weeks after using that before I realized, okay, this has opened up a space in your world. And if it were to break, you would fill that space with another iPad right away. You would do it that same day. It's just such a marvelous device. It's just a slate of metal and glass, but it is such a marvelous multifunctional device. Now that I know that, maybe an iPad 10th generation with one of their keyboard covers, one of their a folio case that charges when you charge the iPad. I don't actually know what the tech is like that. I don't know what's out there, but maybe that's what I need for next time. But for right now, my tech is this exclusively for NaNoWriMo. Because there are no other working parts. There are no other moving parts to NaNoWriMo. I wish this could be my tech just exclusively for all writing. But it hasn't proven to be true. Writing little bits and pieces still give me trouble. Not the writing itself, not the typing itself, but when it comes time for me to post it where it belongs or put a piece of formatting in it, it tends more often than not to fail. Which means that I've always got to have my laptop ready, which defeats the whole purpose. I would love it if I could live my whole life on this thing, is what I'm trying to say. But for NaNoWriMo, what's the matter, baby? Oh, what you doing? What's the baby doing? Want to see your fans? Uh-huh. Here they are. Oh, they love you. They do. I love the baby bee. They do. They love you. They think you're the cutest thing in the world, and so do I. I do. I think you're the cutest thing in the world. So anyway, that's the tech part. Is that this iPad, I guess you could call it an old iPad now. It's the 7th generation. And iPads are up to what? 11, 12 generations? So it's probably time to get a new iPad. That rebels against my spirit because there's nothing wrong with this. It still works just fine. I just wonder if it could work better. But that's the tech. And then we get to the writing itself because we're halfway through, more than halfway through. I have 10 days left before NaNoWriMo, which means that at this point in your Preptober, you should be thinking in terms of scenes and chapters. You should have your story down. You should know what's going to happen, what the arc is. In other words, as the author, you should know what's coming. You don't need to know every little detail, but you should know what's coming. You should know the shape of your story, and now is the time for you to start hammering down the specifics. And the reason I say scenes and chapters is because those aren't necessarily the same thing. One chapter can have 2 or 3 scenes in it. The point I'm trying to make is that both scenes and chapters have a kind of aesthetic integrity of their own. And that's not going to happen. That's not just going to fall off a tree. You have to hammer that into place. Now's the time to be doing that. I'm assuming by now that you have your plot and your subplots. I'm assuming by now that you have your characters. So now it's time for you to figure out how you're going to write this thing. You don't have to sap all the joy out of it. You don't have to plan every single little eye blink, but you need to know the steps you're going to take because when it comes to NaNoWriMo itself, when it comes to November, you're going to be too busy taking those steps to be thinking about them, to be planning and thinking them up. What is your first scene? What is the scene you will be writing at the stroke of midnight on the 1st of November? What is your first scene? Not necessarily your first chapter, although I would argue, for practicality's sake, I have found that it makes the whole writing in November easier. If every 1,667 words, for me, I round that up to 1,700 or 2,000. For me, every writing session, every day's session, whether it's 1,667 words or 1,700 or 2,000, is a chapter, which means you're going to have 31 chapters. So what is going to happen in those 31 chapters? That means you're telling 30 chapters. You're telling a story in 30 chapters, which means that if you have your plot and the arc of it, and you know what story you want to tell, at least generally, each one of those 30 chapters has a lot of weight to carry. They have to move the story forward. They have to get something done. What are they? I'm not saying that you have to know them all. I don't know all of mine. But what's your first section? Let's say you make every day's writing a chapter. What is your first chapter? The first chapter of your story. What is it? What purpose is it serving? It has to get something done. It can't just be you faffing around. My own story for Nanowrimo is called Vio Fala. VIO space FALA. And I have 3 main characters. And so I have a plot, but it seemed natural to me that before I commence with that plot, I should introduce my characters. It's no good to just have them walk into a room so that you can talk about them. That is boring. That's a boring way to introduce your characters. They have to be doing something. It has to matter. You have to know who they are when they're doing something. So I thought up a scene. The first thing that I will write for NaNoWriMo will be a way of introducing them. It will introduce the world. It will introduce their plot line. And it will introduce them. What are you doing? What are you doing? Sorry. Sounds like she's choking. She's not. I promise. She's just thrashing around. That's all. I thought that scene up, and I can't wait to write it. I know exactly what it will be in general, in outline. I know who these characters are. I don't really know at the moment how they talk to each other. I don't even know how they sound. I don't know exactly what kind of diction I want to give them or anybody else in this world. That will be for me to discover as I'm writing. That's the sort of thing you can discover while you're writing and fix while you're writing. So if I start this first chapter and I'm giving them an exalted, Tolkien elf type diction, and then 500 words in, I say, oh no, that's not actually working. I don't want them to sound that way. It's easy as could be. First of all, to not have them sound that way for the rest of the words in that chapter, but then also to go back and fix. Fix what they sounded like in the early part of that chapter, and then just never make that mistake again. I ordinarily caution you strongly against going back and fixing anything. The whole point of NaNoWriMo is that you're writing without editing. But that's not editing, right? That's just a little fix. That's just, I had them sound one way. The way that I want them to sound is an obvious alternative. It's just a matter of going back and quickly rewriting those bits of dialogue. That's not editing. That's basically fixing a spelling mistake. I won't know that until I start writing that chapter. I won't know exactly how I want them to sound. I think I know what they think of each other, but I'm not 100% sure. That also will make itself clear while I'm writing. That's part of the fun of all this. But you've got to know the scene. You might not know how it's going to end up getting written by you, but you've got to know what it is. What is it? What is that first day's writing that you're going to do in just 10 days? Are you ready? Are you at that point? If not, maybe a nice walk around the neighborhood to sort out in your mind what that is. And keep in mind, we're on the 19th or 20th of October? So we are past the point when walking around in the neighborhood and sorting things out in your mind is the end point of what you're doing. You now have to be writing stuff down. You're right on the edge of NaNoWriMo itself. So it's not enough to come back and say, oh yeah, that was a good contemplating session. Now, you have to write down the fruits of it. You should have a sheet of paper or a screen or something that is collecting all of this stuff, all of this skeleton material, in written form, rather than just, it's wonderful to idly speculate. We're well past idle speculation. We're in almost the final run here before we start writing. So I am ready, completely ready. I feel a little bit guilty making AuthorTube or NaNoWriMo videos because this feeling that I have, this feeling of just having lightning running through all, this feeling of not being able to wait, just I can't wait to start creating this stuff, start putting words to it. I realize that a lot of people, even this late in the day, even in the 20th of October, do not feel that about their projected project. They have a project. They know what they're going to be writing for NaNoWrimo, but they don't feel this. This is extra. I foolishly expect it every single time I do a NaNoWrimo project. I often don't feel it, and I often say that a real test of a writer is to write 50,000 words without feeling it. Because it carries weight. It bears a lot of the burden of the daily chore of writing. If you don't have that, you're going to hone a lot of muscles a lot faster. So I feel a little guilty because I have that. If you do, I would love to hear about it. But even if you don't, now is the time to start dress rehearsals, for want of a better word. You now start to have to know what it is you're going to write, scene by scene, dramatic beat by dramatic beat. How long is it going to take you to get to the first big thing that happens in your book? 2 days of writing? 4 days of writing? And how are you going to keep those 4 days of writing interesting even though not the big thing isn't happening? Just because you know the big thing that's coming doesn't mean the reader is patiently going to wait for that. You've got to entertain them from page 1. I'd love to know, all of you who are involved in this NaNoWrimo event, tell me about your tech and tell me about your chapters. I want to know about both. We're getting closer and closer. That's very exciting. So I'll wrap this up for now, and I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube and AuthorTube, and all you writers out at sea.